My name is Isabella, and I will never forget the day I realized the people I trusted most thought they had won. They thought they had stolen everything I had built with my own hands, stripped away my name, my dignity, and my share of a contract worth $100 million. They laughed behind closed doors, signed papers without me, and congratulated each other on outsmarting me. But what they never knew was that I had one call left to make, and that call would change everything. I didn't start out with power, money, or connections. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, but no one believed you could ever leave. My father worked long hours in a factory, and my mother took on whatever odd jobs she could to keep food on the table. I was a dreamer, always scribbling ideas in notebooks, sketching plans for businesses, imagining a world where I wasn't just surviving, but creating something that could outlast me. People used to say I was too ambitious, that girls like me should know their place. But I never listened. I had fire in me, and I refused to let it go out. By the time I was 21, I had moved to the city with nothing but 2 suitcases and a mind full of ideas. I worked out of cafes, libraries, anywhere with Wi-Fi, pitching to anyone who would listen. Most doors slammed in my face. Most people told me no, but I kept pushing, and eventually I built something real. An innovative logistics platform that could change the way companies managed global supply chains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was revolutionary, and soon enough, investors started calling me back. I built a team. I hired people I thought I could trust. We worked day and night, fueled by takeout meals and the kind of desperation only dreamers know, and slowly the pieces came together. By the time I turned 28, our company had become a rising star in the tech world. We weren't just another startup. We were solving problems companies worth billions were struggling with. That's when the big deal came onto the table. It was with one of the largest multinational corporations in the world, a contract worth $100 million. If we secured it, our future was set. My company would be untouchable, my team would be rewarded, and my name would finally carry weight in rooms that had always been closed to me. But success attracts vultures. At first, I thought the tension in the office was just the pressure of negotiations. My co-founders, Mark and Evelyn, had been with me since the early days. We had built everything together, and I trusted them like family. But in the weeks leading up to the signing, they started pulling away, whispering in corners, taking meetings without me. I told myself it was paranoia, that they were just protecting me from unnecessary stress. After all, I was the face of the company, the one always on stage, the one giving interviews. Maybe they were just shielding me from the uglier side of the deal. But then came the day everything changed. We were scheduled to meet with the client's legal team to finalize the terms. I had spent countless nights going over every clause, making sure our interests were protected. When I walked into the boardroom, though, something felt off. My nameplate wasn't on the table. The documents had already been printed, neatly stacked in front of every seat. I reached for one and my hands went cold. My name wasn't on the contract. Instead, the papers listed Mark and Evelyn as the sole founders. They had erased me. Just like that. I looked across the table, and Evelyn smiled that sharp little smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes. Mark avoided my gaze completely, his pen tapping against the folder like he couldn't wait for me to leave. I wanted to scream, to flip the table over, to demand how they could betray me after everything we had been through. But I sat there in silence, my mind spinning. $100 million, and they were cutting me out. Years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and they were pretending I had never existed. The client's team didn't notice at first. To them, this was just another deal. But when the lead lawyer looked at me, something shifted. He asked a simple question, one that sliced through the charade like a blade. "And where is Isabella's signature?" Mark cleared his throat, fumbling for an answer. Evelyn jumped in smoothly, her voice dripping with practiced confidence. Isabella decided to step back from the company. She's pursuing other ventures, and Mark and I will be handling things moving forward. The lawyer raised an eyebrow and turned to me. His gaze lingered, steady, probing. Is that true? Every instinct in me wanted to scream no, to call out their lies, but I forced myself to breathe. This was not the moment to lose control. Instead, I smiled, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Not exactly, I said, but we'll get to that. That was the moment I knew I had to fight. Not just for myself, but for everything I had built. They thought they had already won, but they had underestimated me. They didn't know the lengths I was willing to go to protect what was mine. And they had no idea what was coming next. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, even though inside I was breaking apart. The betrayal cut deeper than I can explain. These were the people I had celebrated with, cried with, built my life with. And now they had carved me out like I was nothing more than a placeholder, a stepping stone on their path to wealth and power. I could have given up right then. I could have walked away, started over, built something new. But no, this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about respect, about justice, about making sure no one ever thought they could erase me again. Over the next few days, I put on a mask. To the outside world, I acted calm, composed, even indifferent. I let Mark and Evelyn think I was retreating, that I had accepted defeat. Behind closed doors, though, I was gathering everything. Emails, contracts, old drafts, every shred of proof that tied me to the company. My name might not have been on that contract, but my fingerprints were all over the foundation of the business. I had the receipts, and soon everyone else would see them too. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, mornings I could barely drag myself out of bed. But anger is a powerful fuel, and mine burned hotter than ever. Each time I thought about Evelyn's smile or Mark's cowardice, I found the strength to keep going. And then came the call, the one they never saw coming. The call I made was not to a friend, not to a family member, but to someone who had been watching from the sidelines for a long time. A man named Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was the kind of lawyer you didn't hire unless you were prepared for war. Sharp, relentless, and absolutely merciless when it came to business law. I'd met him a year earlier at a networking event, and he told me something I never forgot. When the time comes and you realize people aren't who they claim to be, call me. I deal in betrayal, so that night, with my heart pounding and my future hanging by a thread, I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Isabella," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I was wondering when you'd call." I swallowed hard. "They erased me, Jonathan. They're signing the contract tomorrow without me. $100 million, and they cut me out like I never existed." There was a pause on the line, and then a low chuckle. "Good. That means they think they've already won. And people who think they've won are sloppy. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the boardroom, about Evelyn's smile, about the way my name had disappeared from the papers. I told him about the years of work, the late nights, the sacrifices. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking, but Jonathan's voice was steady as ever. "Perfect," he said. "We'll let them play their little game tomorrow. But you'll walk in with me at your side. And when I speak, I promise you they won't see it coming." The next morning, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Gone was the girl who had cried into her pillow. In her place was a woman dressed in steel gray, her hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp with determination. I walked into that boardroom again, this time not alone. Jonathan followed a step behind me, carrying a folder so thick it could crush the table. Mark and Evelyn looked startled, though they tried to cover it. Evelyn gave me that same sharp smile, but it flickered when she saw Jonathan. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his pen tapping faster. The client's lawyer, the same one who had asked about my signature, raised an eyebrow. "I see we have company today." Jonathan didn't waste time. He dropped the folder on the table with a heavy thud. "My name is Jonathan Pierce, and I represent Isabella. Before anyone signs anything, we need to clarify ownership and contributions to this company. Otherwise, this contract is invalid." The room went silent. Evelyn's smile vanished. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jonathan opened the folder and began laying out documents. Emails with my name as the author, drafts of contracts I had written, intellectual property filings bearing my signature, even photographs of me leading investor presentations. Piece by piece, he constructed the undeniable truth. I wasn't just part of the company, I was the company. The client's lawyer leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying the evidence. The executives whispered among themselves, glancing at each page Jonathan presented. The weight of proof was undeniable. Finally, Evelyn snapped. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp. "Isabella left the company months ago. She's exaggerating her role. Mark and I have been running everything." Jonathan didn't even look up from the papers. "Is that so? Because here's an email time-stamped 3 weeks ago, with Isabella outlining the exact logistics model you're pitching today. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Evelyn's face turned pale. Mark dropped his pen. The client's lawyer cleared his throat. "It appears there's a significant dispute here. Until it's resolved, we cannot proceed with this contract." Panic flickered in Evelyn's eyes. $100 million slipping through her fingers, all because she thought she could erase me. But I didn't gloat. Not yet. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost gentle. You tried to erase me. You thought I wouldn't fight back. But you forgot one thing. I built this company from nothing, and I don't go quietly. The meeting ended in chaos. Mark and Evelyn stormed out, their voices rising as they argued with each other in the hallway. The client's team packed up their papers, murmuring about legal battles and reputational risks. Jonathan gathered his folder and gave me a satisfied nod. Round 1, he said. But this is just the beginning. He was right. The battle wasn't over. It was only shifting arenas. Over the next few weeks, I found myself in the center of a storm. Mark and Evelyn tried everything to discredit me. They spread lies in the press, claiming I had been unstable, that I had walked away willingly. They whispered to investors, trying to poison them against me, but every time they made a move, Jonathan and I countered. We released carefully timed statements backed with hard evidence. We produced contracts, recordings of meetings, financial documents. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Investors who had doubted me started calling again. Reporters who had ignored me now wanted interviews. The narrative was changing, and with it, so was my power. Behind the scenes, though, it was war. There were nights I barely slept, days I barely ate. Every conversation felt like a chess match, every decision a gamble. But I kept reminding myself why I was fighting. This wasn't just about money. It was about making sure no one ever thought they could erase me again. And then, just when I thought the storm might consume me, I got a message that changed everything. It was from the client's lead lawyer, the same one who had first asked about my missing signature. He wanted to meet privately. No boardrooms, no executives, just him and me. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. He arrived in a dark suit, carrying nothing but a leather briefcase. When he sat across from me, his eyes were steady, sharp. Isabella, he said, I believe you. I've reviewed everything Jonathan sent us, and it's clear you were wronged. The corporation doesn't want to walk away from this deal, but they also don't want to be caught in a lawsuit. So here's what I propose. We move forward, but only if your name is on that contract, front and center, as the primary founder. I stared at him, hardly believing my ears. After everything, after the lies and the betrayal, they were putting me back at the table. But there was more. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. And between you and me, the board has been impressed by the way you've handled yourself under pressure. They see strength in you they never saw in your co-founders. If this deal goes through, they may want to work with you directly, without Mark and Evelyn at all. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. Not the polite, strained smile I'd worn in public, but a real one, born from fire and triumph. Tell them, I said, I'm ready. The deal wasn't over, not by a long shot. Mark and Evelyn would fight, and they would fight dirty. But for the first time since they erased me, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The power was coming back to me. And this time, I wasn't going to let it go. They thought they had won the $100 million contract. But they had no idea the game had only just begun. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I lay awake in the dark, watching the city lights crawl across the ceiling and thinking about all the ways this could break. Jonathan told me to rest, to conserve my energy, but my mind kept spinning through every thread I'd pulled, every receipt I'd collected, every betrayal I'd forced into daylight. I kept replaying that first boardroom moment in my head, the absence of my name, the taste of humiliation like metal on my tongue. Humiliation is a teacher, and I had learned enough to carry me through a lifetime. At dawn, I brewed coffee and opened the folder I'd labeled, in pen so black it looked like a wound. Origin. It had the earliest sketches of the routing model I built at my kitchen table, the whiteboard photos with algorithm steps scrawled in my hand, the Slack exports where I coached Mark through his first client pitch, the draft patent claims I had rewritten at 2 a.m, while Evelyn was still confusing method with system. Looking at those pages, I could feel the old fury simmer into something cooler and far more dangerous. They had tried to recast history, but the past leaves fingerprints. All I had to do was show them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, intimate in a way that felt almost theatrical. Mark sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit that didn't fit his shoulders anymore, like he'd grown too quickly into a world he didn't earn. Evelyn looked immaculate in white, her hair lacquered into perfection, her lips a line of iron. Their lawyer, a polished silver fox type, gave me a passing glance that telegraphed one thing: underestimation. I let him have it. Let him relax into the idea that I was a story without an ending. Jonathan leaned toward me, his voice a whisper only I could hear. Stay anchored. Tell the truth like you're pouring a foundation. The judge entered. We stood, we sat. And then suddenly it began. Paper turned to speech. Story turned to evidence. The opposing counsel started with a narrative so well rehearsed, I could hear the metronome behind it. According to them, I was a visionary who lacked discipline, a charismatic founder who had drifted into irrelevance, while Mark and Evelyn did the hard adult work of building. It was the kind of lie that sounds true if you want it to be. Their exhibits were curated as if my life could be edited by omission. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He placed a single photograph on the projector. A whiteboard slanted by the angle of a kitchen, my handwriting crawling diagonally across it like ivy. Underneath, a date stamp from 3 years earlier. Then he layered on the Slack threads my Git commits, my calendar invites with agendas titled in the same hand. The early patent draft with margin notes where I corrected Evelyn's misuse of the term idempotent. He moved through time like a mason, block by block, and the wall went up in front of everyone. When he finished, you could feel the narrative shift in the room, like the floor had tilted a few degrees and all the loose pieces slid to my side. But the part that mattered most wasn't an artifact of the past. It was fresh. It was what they had been doing while they thought I was too wounded to notice. Jonathan called our forensic accountant, a quiet woman who wore her hair in a braid down her back and carried no paper at all. She spoke from memory. She explained a pattern of payments that didn't make sense. Small transfers to a vendor with a newly minted LLC, no online presence beyond a hollow website and a mailing address that matched a mailbox store 2 blocks from Evelyn's condo. She didn't accuse. She described. Numbers aren't emotional. They just add up. The Silver Fox lawyer tried to rattle her. He failed. When she finished, the courtroom felt colder. Jonathan did not look at me. He didn't need to. We both knew what this meant. The story had bled into conduct, and conduct draws regulators like sugar draws ants. At recess, I stepped into the hallway and felt a weight settle in my bones. Winning in court could restore my name and share, but I wanted something truer than balance sheets and ownership percentages. I wanted what they had taken from me when they smirked across the table and told the room I was gone. I wanted the door that had closed on me to swing on its hinges and crash back into them. That was when I made the call. Not to Jonathan. Not to the press. I called the client's general counsel directly, the same man who had watched me with those steady eyes across a conference table, and asked the only question that mattered. He answered on the first ring like he'd been expecting this moment. "It's Isabella," I said. "I know," he said, and I could hear the gravity in his voice, the unspoken calculation of someone protecting his company from a very expensive mess. "Are you ready to move forward with us as the principal? Because my board would entertain that discussion." "I am," I said. "But it has to be clean, and you need to see what we found this morning." I told him about the shell vendor, the pattern of payments, the proximity to Evelyn's address. I didn't embellish. He didn't speak until I finished. "Send me everything. I'll open an internal review on our side and inform procurement. For now, we will suspend any negotiations with their entity." He paused. "And Isabella? I'll need to bring in our outside firm. This will move quickly." I hung up and exhaled so slowly I felt the air leave my ribs like a tide. The call had been like tipping over the first domino in a line I had been building in secret for weeks. By the time we returned to the courtroom, the oxygen felt different. The opposing counsel's confidence had frayed. During cross, he tried to paint me as vindictive, as if revenge had replaced reason in me, but the judge sustained Jonathan's objections when the questions veered more toward character assassination than fact. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke plainly. I didn't perform. I told the truth the way you tell someone how to get to your house, step by step, landmark by landmark, no flourish needed. I talked about the nights I'd lost count of, the days I fixed bugs while investors watched my hands shake from too much coffee, the first time my platform rerouted a shipment away from catastrophic delay and saved a client millions. I talked about Mark's early failures and how I coached him through them, about Evelyn's skill with people and how I paired it with my architecture so together we could close deals. I did not diminish them. I located them. Everyone knew the difference. It should have ended there for the day, but before the judge could adjourn, the bailiff slipped a note to the clerk, who slipped it to the bench. The judge read, then looked up with a face that had learned the art of staying blank. "Counsel," she said, I have been informed that the plaintiff's exhibits have been requested by outside counsel for the client corporation in connection with an internal review. This will not delay proceedings, but I expect you to coordinate copies by the end of the day. I felt the smallest pulse of satisfaction, the kind you don't allow to reach your face. Jonathan's foot nudged mine. He didn't look over. He didn't have to. The call had moved the board. Outside, press had gathered like they always do when Money and Betrayal share an address. Microphones thrust forward. Questions fluttered like moths. Jonathan shielded me with a polite hand and a phrase he had perfected. No comment while litigation is ongoing. I stared straight ahead and walked to the curb. The sky had gone the color of nickel. Rain threatened, then held back. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, the whiteboard from the photograph now leaning against a wall like an old friend. I ordered food and didn't touch it. I watched files finish uploading to the secure portal the client's counsel had set up. Then I opened a new document and wrote a list titled, simply, After. It had nothing to do with winning the case and everything to do with what came next. Hire engineers I trusted. Build a board with spines. Establish a compliance officer from day one. Make the culture a place where truth lives close to the surface. I wrote until the list exhausted me into sleep. The next morning, while I was tying my hair back, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a single line. Check your email. Subject line starts with procurement. My stomach tightened. I opened my inbox. There it was, an anonymous email from a drop account, with attached PDFs of internal messages between Evelyn and a procurement manager at the client, messages that danced right up to the line between influence and bribery, then stepped over it. The attachment included a draft invoice template for the shell vendor, with a handwritten note in a scanned corner. Keep these under $75K to avoid full committee review. I forwarded it to Jonathan and to the general counsel. Jonathan called immediately. Say nothing to anyone else. I'll authenticate and file. And Isabella, good work. I didn't try to guess who sent it. I didn't want to know which thread I had tugged that loosened this. The truth has a way of leaking when it's under pressure. Within 48 hours, the client suspended all pending discussions with Mark and Evelyn's entity and notified them of an internal investigation. The press didn't have details, but they had enough smoke to go looking for flame. A blogger with a nose for scandal posted a story about possible impropriety around a 9-figure logistics transformation contract. It spread the way things do when the numbers are large enough to make people gasp. In court, their counsel came armed with bluster that had lost its battery. They moved to exclude the new exhibits. The judge denied without ceremony. When Jonathan questioned me again, he walked me through a timeline that now included not just what I built, but the lengths they had gone to erase me. He asked me how I discovered the shell vendor. I told the truth. Pattern recognition is my first language. The courtroom was silent in that little way that says people are listening to understand, not to respond. During a recess, Evelyn approached me near the water fountain where the carpet gave way to tile. Her voice was quiet, almost human. Stop this, she said. You're going to burn it all down. I looked at her and saw the woman who had high-fived me in a dim office the night we landed our first pilot, the woman who cried after our first firing because she hated disappointing people. Then I saw the woman who had smiled when my name was missing. People contain multitudes. Betrayal is choosing which one to be when it counts. You lit the match, I said. I'm just opening the windows. Her eyes hardened. You'll never get the deal without us. I didn't bother to smile. Watch me. On the 4th day of proceedings, the judge encouraged settlement talks in chambers. Jonathan and I exchanged a glance. We agreed to a conversation, not for desperation, but for documentation. In a small room with stale air and a too-bright lamp, their counsel floated numbers that sounded like apology wrapped in accounting, a buyout of my original share, a non-disparagement clause, a promise to recognize my contributions in a press release. While he spoke, I wrote 3 words on a legal pad and turned it so only Jonathan could see. Not for sale. We declined. We returned to court. The next week, the client's general counsel asked me to meet, officially this time, in their headquarters with windows that framed the city like a photograph. He wasn't alone. 2 board members sat with him and a woman from their risk committee. They didn't waste time. We want to move forward with your platform, one board member said. We are prepared to enter exclusive negotiations with an entity you control. We will require standard warranties and a special audit clause for the first 18 months. We will also require your certification that none of your current or former partners have a beneficial interest in your new entity. I felt a thing in me lift and settle, a hawk catching an updraft and then finding the line. I can certify that, I said, and I'll agree to the audit clause. The risk committee chair leaned forward. We'll also require that you build a team capable of executing globally. I already have names, I said, and I did. My list titled after had become a spreadsheet titled Now. I had been calling and coffeeing and quietly forging ahead. Because revenge without rebuilding is a story that ends too soon. They slid a draft term sheet across the table. My hands were steady when I took it. The numbers made my throat go tight, not because the money dazzled me, but because it was a valuation that respected the thing itself. The work, the architecture, the elegance of the flow I had designed like a river system. I told them I would have Jonathan review and return marked up language within 48 hours. The general counsel smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. When I stepped outside, the air had the clean-edge smell that only arrives after rain. I called Jonathan. He picked up on the first ring. "We're on," I said. "Exclusivity, audit clause, full control." "Good," he said. "Finish the fight, then sign." Finishing the fight meant finishing the case. In closing arguments, their counsel tried one last time to paint me as a founder who had fallen away and returned only when the money got loud. Jonathan didn't bother to refute character with character. He refuted it with time. He drew a line from my kitchen whiteboard to the contract they had tried to sign without me, each point labeled with a document or a date or a witness. He ended with a sentence so simple it landed like a gavel. "If you remove her name, you do not remove her work, and the law recognizes the difference." The judge took the case under advisement. We waited. Waiting feels like drowning without water. During those days, I worked as if the decision were already written in my bones. I signed a lease on a floor in a building with good light and better wiring. I made offers to engineers who had kept their integrity even when staying might have been easier. I hired the forensic accountant's firm to design our internal controls. I sat with a designer and chose a brand that did not center me, but centered the promise. Clarity in motion. When the decision came, I was in my empty office with the windows open and the sound of traffic rising like a river. Jonathan didn't call. He came in person, appearing in my doorway with a look that let me breathe before he spoke. We won. The words were plain on the paper, but reading them felt like hearing my name spoken correctly by someone who had mispronounced it for years. The court recognized my co-founder's status and my equity. It recognized my IP contributions and enjoined Mark and Evelyn from using or representing my platform without authorization. It ordered them to return confidential materials and barred them from interfering with my negotiations with the client. I sat down hard in a chair that had been a splurge. I felt the victory move through me slowly, like warmth returning to fingers that had gone numb. There was more, the kind of more you don't say aloud in case you break it. The judge referred the shell vendor matter to the appropriate authorities. Mark and Evelyn left the courthouse without stopping for cameras. In the days that followed, investors who had once ghosted me suddenly remembered how to dial. I ignored most of them. I didn't need fair weather capital. I needed partners with weatherproof souls. The signing with the client took place in a room with glass walls and a table that looked like it had been carved from a single tree. Their board chair attended, along with the general counsel and a handful of executives whose names I had learned to pronounce perfectly, because respect is a language you speak in details. Jonathan sat at my side. The pen was heavy in my hand, and when I signed, I did not think about the money. I thought about the woman who had walked into a boardroom and found her name missing. I thought about the ink making it true again. After the formalities, the general counsel took me aside. "You don't know this," he said, "but the call you made that day saved us. If we had signed with them and the shell vendor had gone undiscovered, it would have cost us far more than dollars. It would have cost us reputation. You did the right thing when it would have been easier to burn it all down." I nodded. "I still lit a few things," I said. He smiled. "Sometimes you have to. Just make sure you light the right ones." I walked out into a day so bright the sidewalk glittered. My phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I recognized, but had deleted in a moment of discipline. An investor who once called me volatile for insisting my name stay on the patent. The text was a congratulations wrapped in a question about my next round. I typed a reply that was professional, gracious, and absolute. We're fully funded. On the way back to the office, my driver asked if I wanted to take the route along the river. I said yes. The water moved the way my platform moved freight across continents, elegant, inevitable, finding the path of least resistance and greatest honesty. I thought about calling my mother and then decided to tell her in person, to put the signed copy in her hands and let the paper tell part of the story for me. When I reached the office, the team I had assembled stood from their desks. There were no balloons, no champagne, nothing performative. Just people who had chosen the work and chosen me. I told them what we had built would outlast any one of us, and that our job now was to be worth the faith that had been placed in us. They nodded in a way I recognized. Not entertainment, engagement. I gave them the afternoon to do something extravagant for themselves. Then I sat alone again and breathed. In the quiet, like a sacrament. Mark and Evelyn sent a single message through council asking for a meeting to discuss a roadmap forward. There was nothing forward left between us. I declined. I will never know whether they felt remorse or only regret for being caught. It doesn't matter. The story they told about me is over. The one I'm writing doesn't include them. That night, I took the original whiteboard down and replaced it with a new one. I wrote a single sentence across the top. Build like the truth is watching. Under it, I drew the first new flowchart of the next phase. Expansion into maritime analytics, predictive routing for climate risk, a pilot with ports that wanted to pull tomorrow closer. My handwriting is neater now. My lines are straighter. I still make a mess, but it's a productive one. Sometimes, when I think back to the beginning, I remember a voice, my own, on the phone, steady despite the hurricane in my chest, telling a general counsel what he needed to hear so he could do what was right. They thought they had won the $100 million contract. They thought erasing my name would erase my claim. They forgot that erasing ink doesn't erase truth. The call I made didn't just change a deal. It changed the story of who I was inside it. I locked the office and stepped into a city that had witnessed me become myself the hard way. A breeze lifted my hair. Somewhere, a diner clattered, a bus sighed, a woman laughed like she'd just decided to start over. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address that used to feel like the edge of the map. He nodded and pulled into traffic. As we crossed the bridge, the skyline arranged itself in the window like a signature finally written correctly. I watched it and let the feeling arrive fully, without apology. This time, I would not be erased.